my name is Binni, and yes, that is not just an internet nickname, it's also what I go by in real life. My name is, actual name is Brynjólfur, but it's often shortened to Binni in the country where I'm from, and I'm from Iceland. I currently live in Sweden and work in the video game industry in Stockholm. I worked in that industry for around 13 years of my life now for several different companies. But actually none of that I think would have ever have happened if my dad had not brought home a thing that would change my life back in 1982 when I was 5 years old. The thing he brought home was a Sinclair ZX Spectrum 48K microcomputer. That wonderful rubber-keyed wonder really caught my wide-eyed 5-year-old attention. With the Spectrum I got some games, the best of which was probably Horace Goes Skiing. And I don't think I'd ever played video games before I played Horace. That ambulance truck when crossing the road was a rude awakening for a 5-year-old, but I guess it also meant I was very careful around roads as a result. I also remember figuring out how to see the basic code of games and start to write my own small games. I don't know when this happened. I might have been like 6 or 7 years old, and I have no idea how I actually figured out how to go into the code. There was probably some button that you would press. The games that had not machine code. And I usually did just stupid text adventures or Hangman style games and things like that. But the bug was firmly lodged in my brain and it just never left. So from 1982 to 1992, 10 years, my only way of playing games or even using a computer at home was in fact just the Spectrum. I was not like the other kids, maybe other kids that I knew that got maybe an Amiga or a PC 286 or Macintosh. No, I just had the Spectrum. But I did get an upgrade back in, I think it's probably 86 or 87, in the form of a 128K plus 2, which had a built-in tape deck and it could also do music in games. But yeah, for 10 years of my life, the Specky was my only computer. And finally in 1992, I got both a PC, a 486, and a Sega Mega Drive, and I never really looked back at the Spectrum. But now I am looking back, and I'm inviting YouTube to come along the ride with me. So, a little bit about my background and the country I come from. Iceland in the 1980s was a really fun place to grow up in. Iceland in fact was actually growing up as a whole, as a country, and just becoming a real country, it felt like. We were only 35 years removed from declaring our independence, and many of our grandparents had been born in houses made of soil, grass and mud, since timber wasn't available in the country. We were a poor country of peasants and fishermen living in harsh weather conditions, where it was just very hard to grow things. It was a very tough existence. And back in 1977, when I was born, it did feel like we had just crawled out of this. But the 1980s were different. Suddenly Iceland had the world's strongest man, we had 2 Miss Worlds, we had the first elected female president in the world, and Reagan and Gorbachev had a decisive Cold War meeting in the country. Björk and the Sugar Cubes were famous, and we were finally part of the Eurovision Song Contest back in 1986. We really felt as a country that we were a shoo-in to win that year, but alas, 16th place was the end result. And in sports, we had become really good at sports. We were the B World Champions in handball. So back then there was an A and a B World Championship, for the good and not the great handball countries. But we celebrated like we were the real world champions. We were a proper country and getting noticed as such. The mood of the 80s in Iceland was that we had the strongest men, most beautiful women, and there really wasn't anything we couldn't do. And it was during this era we also got invaded by the microcomputers. So what is interesting to note about the microcomputer invasion in Iceland is that we really didn't have a clear winner over there in terms of which computers people were using. It felt like every kid in every street had one at home. But usually it was different types, it was different computers. So maybe one kid had an Amstrad CPC, another a Commodore 64, and yet another maybe a weird Apple II or a BBC Micro. I remember seeing all of these and playing all of these at some kid's house, and it was just a world of adventure. I had the Spectrum, and it probably was the most common one in Iceland, meaning you could copy games, although that was really a very fickle industry. In terms of the games that we were exposed to, so Specky games were sold everywhere, but only the really big games, and mostly was just compilations, I would say. I had some really great compilations, like for instance the Taito compilation, and I remember I also had one with Renegade, and I did get the biggest games like Robocop and things like that. We never really got straight to budget titles, and rarely all the fun janky ones that the Spectrum actually had. But what I did is that I read about every single one of them in Your Sinclair magazine. As a kid in Iceland in the 80s, Your Sinclair was my gateway to the world outside of Iceland. I actually learned to speak English as a kid by obsessively plowing through every issue I could get my hands on again and again. I did not know the pronunciation of many of the words, but I did understand and read English. And in every issue of Your Sinclair, I would see these ads for games I would never really end up playing. I also read glowing reviews for those games. So as a result, I have these vivid memories of great Spectrum games, their ratings, their cover art and their screenshots, but I never played most of them. And that is actually why I decided to make this YouTube channel. I've made a rather long list. I think it's about 50 games as of now. I remember wanting to experience as a kid, and I have vivid memories of even though I never played them. And you are invited to go along this ride of discovery with me. So, this is how these videos will work. I'll start by gathering some basic info about the game, and then I'm just gonna blind react to them at first. After a while, maybe an hour or so, I'll cut back in, and then I'd have gathered more detailed info about the gameplay, or perhaps invited someone from the YouTube community to help me out, how to play the game proper, or maybe a friend that I had when I was growing up. And in the end, after a couple of hours or maybe longer, I'll just be ending up by summarizing each game, whether I like it or whether I think that 8 to 9-year-old Binni would have loved it back in the day. So I'm doing this video series for myself because I think it would be a lot of fun for me, and I hope you guys will enjoy tagging along.